Molt bona tarda. Benvinguts un cop més. Excuseu-me que tinc la veu encara una mica debilitada, però tot arribarà. De moment, més o menys em senten, i el que vull dir-los és molt ràpid. Primer, estic content que siguin aquí. Benvinguts a aquesta nova sessió. Estic encantat i agraït, com sempre, a l'Ester Cabanes, la degà i al departament per la seva iniciativa i per la seva persistència, i només un parell d'observacions ràpides. Primera, cada cop, cada nova sessió, em sorprèn la capacitat d'imaginació que teniu per inventar nous temes interessants. Moltes gràcies, és molt estimulant i és un goig, perquè també el tema d'avui estic segur que per molts de nosaltres serà estimulant i n'aprendrem. Per mi és fàcil d'aprendre, però no sé gran cosa. Però per vostès que en saben més, segur que també n'aprendran. I la segona observació, que veu una mica el fil del títol i del que intueixo que pot ser la ponència d'avui, és que un dels avantatges que té el tenir una certa veterania. Els dic una cosa, estic molt content perquè exactament d'aquí mig any faré 80. Em fa una il·lusió de conya, perdó. És que no sé, és curiós, em fa molta il·lusió. Ja els avisarem temps perquè em pugui felicitar oportunament, Ester, etc. Però, una cosa que té gràcia d'acumular temps i experiència és que s'aprèn coses, i una de les que he après clarament, però clarament hi ha molta profunditat, és que hi ha una cosa que és objecte de demanda universal per part de qualsevol persona, en qualsevol circumstància i a qualsevol edat, que és el reconeixement. Totes les persones del món, sigui quina sigui l'origen, la situació, totes les persones del món, totes som demandants de reconeixement. I és l'eina més important per transmetre consideració, afecte, estimació, per ajudar els altres, és donar reconeixement, que a més és bastant senzill. Això que nosaltres mesurem això de no donem massa coses, allò gratuïtament, però la gràcia de donar reconeixement és que és de franc, no costa res, i com més es dona, més capacitat se'n té de donar. O sigui que és perfecte. Llavors, intueixo que el sistema informal de col·laboració, de cooperació amb els infants o amb en situació de tutela és que possiblement aquestes xarxes informals aporten implícitament dosi de reconeixement que aquestes persones ajuden a millorar la seva pròpia imatge, entre altres coses. En tot cas, i si no té a veure la conferència, ho farem de seguida, però retinguin l'observació que el reconeixement, sisplau, aboquin sempre que puguin reconeixement a tothom, que val la pena i no costa gens i és molt útil per la cohesió social, per la pau, etc. Moltes gràcies.
Bé, bona tarda a tothom i benvinguts a una conferència més al Palau Macaya. Avui tenim aquí a Robbie Gilligan. Benvingut, Robbie. Robbie és... porto la xuleta per a no deixar-me res. És persona molt coneguda aquí a Catalunya, sobretot per les nostres amigues de la universitat, que avui estan aquí, Universitat Autònoma, Universitat de Girona, Universitat de Barcelona, perquè normalment ja formen part d'espais de treball en Robbie, sobretot Laura Arnau, que forma part del seu grup de recerca. I jo el volia presentar perquè Robbie és treballador social, és professor emèrit del Trinity College de Dublín, ha estat 40 anys fent classes i, per tant, ja s'ha guanyat el descans. Però com qualsevol persona inquieta, de les persones que ens dediquem a l'àmbit social, com veieu, està aquí per a compartir amb nosaltres una conferència i, a més, vull dir, a part que continua sent treballador sociocol·legiat, ha publicat àmpliament en revistes especialitzades, com per exemple Child Abuse and Neglect o Children and Society, participa en diferents xarxes, és especialista i ha treballat en l'àmbit, sobretot, de la transició a la vida adulta de joves que han estat tutelats i extutelats i també ha treballat en l'acolliment residencial i en l'acolliment familiar, tant en família extensa com en família aliena. De fet, va formar part d'un canvi a Irlanda en un procés de desinstitucionalització. que ho he dit bé. Llavors, avui, Robbie, bàsicament, la seva conferència ve donada per a parlar una mica sobre, moltes vegades, sovint, els xiquets i les xiquetes que han estat tutelades, qui han parlat de totes les conseqüències que tenen perquè a conseqüència del maltractament que han sofert a casa, a conseqüència del trànsit de la seva vida a través de centres, acolliments, però també hi ha un tema que ha sortit a vegades que és l'estigma, de pensar que els xiquets i les xiquetes tutelades són xiquets que no, que se'ls veu com unes persones que han fet alguna cosa o que no tenen possibilitats. I els estudis ens diuen que això no és veritat, que els xiquets majoritàriament tenen èxit, i a més, com nosaltres com a societat podem ajudar en les xarxes informals. Aquest seria el tema de la ponència d'avui, de la importància de no només els professionals que treballen en l'àmbit, és important que creem vincle amb ells, que els recolzem, que els ajudem, però sobretot és molt important que formen part del seu context comunitari més immediat perquè els professors, els entrenadors de futbol, les persones, la senyora de la biblioteca, qualsevol persona pot ser un punt de referència important i també un tutor de resiliència en l'àmbit del desenvolupament d'aquests joves en el seu trànsit a la vida adulta. I sense res més a dir, perquè aquí hem vingut a escoltar Robbie, us deixo en Robbie Gilligan. Robbie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Esther, and thank you, Mr. President, as well, both of you for introductions, and to thank the team who were behind the invitation to come here and to help put together the program. Sorry, I'm just getting feedback there. Thank you all very much for coming. I know it's for many of you the end of the working day, so it shows an extra commitment, I think, for you all to be here, and I really appreciate that. It's a great honor to be invited to this great city, to speak to you all in such a beautiful setting as well. So thank you very much. So the title, as you can now see, is Informal Social Support, an undervalued resource in the lives of children in care and care leavers. This is the key phrase, informal social support. And I'm going to be distinguishing that from formal social support, which of course is the kind of support that's delivered by the services and the systems that government or NGOs provide. But what I'm particularly focusing on today is the kind of support that's often less visible or less appreciated, perhaps, not unappreciated, but perhaps it's less visible or less appreciated, which is support provided by ordinary citizens who do sometimes extraordinary things. So I invite you to reflect on what I'm going to be saying on that. So why is support so important to care experienced people? Well, any of us who have been parents or have been adults responsible for children in our extended family, or as professionals, or in any capacity really, we know that children and young people need quite a lot of support. And the hard lesson parents learn quite quickly is that it's not just until they're 4 or 10 or 14 or 18, but that young people need support into adulthood. And we all need support. As Mr. President said, I'm recently retired, and my wife would add those quotation marks to the claim that I'm retired. But at all ages, we need support. But young people who've grown up in our care systems, in foster care or residential care, in public care, state care, different terms in different countries, but they have an extra need for support because one of the main reasons they're in the care system is because the normal family system could not provide the level of care and support that they need. And the system has judged, the legal or social system has judged that their interests are best served by living in care. But when they go to leave care at age 18, they don't have the same kind of backup that other young people might expect and usually have. So this leads to a number of issues for them. An issue of precarity, that they're in precarious circumstances, unstable, uncertain circumstances in relation to things like housing and money. Not always, but one of the things that comes through from various research studies and asking young people how they find this experience is they say they are really aware of the uncertainty. They don't know for sure in a way that other young people do with their own families. And that uncertainty also extends into the world of relationships. How much former carers will be committed to them, how will their birth family members respond to their perhaps returning to the family home or to different returning to siblings or aunts or grandparents. There's, as Mr. President has mentioned, there's a risk of stigma, and Esther, a risk of stigma and its undermining effects, because the public doesn't necessarily have a sympathetic view of what being tutelado or in care means. And they have got that message very often loud and clear in every country. All of these factors may eat away at their confidence, and it may mean that they experience tangible barriers in making progress in the world of work or education, to do with their own confidence or to do with the beliefs that adults hold about their abilities, sometimes negative beliefs. So also relevant to this is the fact that very often young people growing out of the care system have weakened social networks. They came into care because they had very often weaker social networks. And in general, those have not got much stronger during their time and may actually have got weaker during their time in care. So this is just a very brief overview of the kind of challenges young people leaving care may face. Now, it's important to say, however, that they're not all doing poorly. They do show a remarkable degree of resilience very often and make quite good progress. But where they make progress, it is very often the fact, when you look more deeply as to why, that they are receiving support of some critical kind from somebody. And that's, I think, one of the important things for researchers is to try and understand better what is driving that support and what are the kinds of support that make a key difference. So when we talk about support, I think there are there's two perspectives or two dimensions. One is support in times of distress. I taught students for 40 years, and one of the iron laws of life as a student is when times are hard, you go home. Where is home for the young people who leave care? It's not as clear. It's a very ambiguous concept very often for young people who've left care. Where is home? And the uncertainty I mentioned earlier is very much connected to that point of where is home. But besides support being about relief of stress or distress, it's also, I think, we need to think of it more positively as being helping people on the road to the future, helping them make positive progress. So in times of distress, we might hope that support can resolve or ease immediate challenges. I've no money, I don't have somewhere to live, I'm not well, I'm pregnant. So in some ways, an immediate or fairly short-term or necessary fix to an immediate problem. And that is very important. absolutely. But I think it's important that we have a wider understanding of what support means, of what it can mean. And in terms of making a long-term difference in people's lives, it's also important that we think about support on the road to progress, to support as affecting transformative change over the life course in the young person's life. I was reading recently a case published in one of the journals of a young person who had managed to reach the age of 12 in a children's home, and he'd managed to reach the age of 12 without being properly able to read and write. And he was brought out to a swimming class in the community outside the children's home. And in that class, he discovered that all the other children could read. And he decided he didn't want to be any different. And that was his motivating force for learning to read. And that learning to read was a turning point, because he then could follow the normal courses in school and eventually enter university. None of that could have happened in a way unless he'd had that turning point moment of discovery or realization. Now, we may wonder, how did he get to that point, to get to 12 years of age without this capacity to read? But the point is, that was where he was. And it was that simple matter of the opportunity to learn to read unlocked so many other doors. But in fact, it was also the opportunity to step outside the world of the children's home and meet children from other backgrounds, that too was a very big turning point, because in that chance encounter, he discovers that he can't read and they can. And why is that? But of course, those turning point experiences may be, opening. I will present other examples later, but helping young people develop a talent they have that's relevant to work, or opening up work opportunities, allowing them gain work experience, taking steps on the education ladder. They're just some of the transformative opportunities that may arise. And many of those are opportunities that can be facilitated or delivered by people who are actually informal actors. By informal, I mean they're not professionally paid to be involved in the young person's life. So formal support I'm just defining as being from services and from professionals in general. Informal is people who are doing this out of commitment of some kind that's not tied to it's not their job description. So the long-term effects of positive support in this sense is that it may help reinforce the young person's positive identity. And Mr. President mentioned this very critical term of recognition, critical in the sense of important. It is possibly one of the most important ideas in political science and in social science now, this idea of respect, of recognition, of appreciation in social and interpersonal and legal and other terms. So a person having a positive sense of themselves and being seen positively by others is very important to their all-round progress and development. Being seen as capable, being seen as sociable, being seen as connected, being seen as worthy, and being seen and seeing themselves. Also, this influences how they see themselves. And importantly, it does seem important to have a certain degree of optimism or positivity about life if you're going to succeed. The importance of positive skills and mentoring those, and we'll see some examples later of how grandparents and other people may help young people to develop skills and confidence. The importance of laying down educational memories that you may drop out of school, but can you remember good parts of school experience that may help you consider returning later when you're older and maybe more settled in life? And maybe that second chance will be the turning point for you and your children in terms of your relationship with education. And it may be somebody who is an informal actor in the person's life who can make the difference. building social connections, friendships, connections to community organizations and so on, helps people have a sense of belonging and recognition. The other thing that's important is in those relationships that the change is sustained. So if I try to lose weight, which is one of my wife's projects, part of the project is not just convincing myself, but also sustaining the effort. Begin the diet and continue the effort. So continuing is the thing that makes the difference. And that's so sustaining the change is important. And it's often people around us who help us to do that. So another point as well is that formal support, I'm not here to, in any sense, criticize or undermine the role of formal support. It's extremely important. It's not that we replace formal support with informal support. We need both. That's really my argument. However, there is only a limited amount of resources and capacity in every system, and very often the very specific needs that a single young person has, it may be hard for the system to meet those needs in the way that the young person wishes. Also, the system is mandated to provide services under law, and there are various rules that govern that, like the age limits and the eligibility terms and so on. So you can only be helped if you meet certain criteria, including age. And the young person's circumstances may not quite fit all that. And even if they do, the mandate the agency has to provide the service may run out when the young person reaches a certain age. There's also the willingness of the young person to take up services or support. If they have had bad experiences in the system as they grow up, they may become more and more disillusioned with the system and may find it hard to approach the system for help. There's also a reality that a certain proportion of care leavers maybe live in quite unstable circumstances where they have a lot of disadvantage in their lives, and that instability may make it difficult for them to align their lives with what systems require, like turning up on time every time for your appointment, and getting organized to be in a certain place at a certain time, and so on. Another issue in formal support is it's often seen in very practical terms, which is good, but there's more than practical required. So, the system may give you money, or it may help you with accommodation, but it may not be able to help you with your loneliness or your emotional tangles in romantic relationships, which risk capsizing the rest of your life, or mental health or addiction problems. There's maybe limits to how intensively systems can support you with that. They may also not really be able to invest hugely in supporting educational return, which is an important issue for people who've with troubled histories who may have dropped out of the education system. So these are some of the limitations or challenges the formal system faces when it tries to engage with the needs of young people who have left care. And I emphasize again that there are very many fantastic things happening in formal systems. I know that's the case in Catalonia, where there is a big commitment to this group. But in every system, I think the people who operate systems would acknowledge there's more to be done, because this is a relatively new field, I think, field of practice, which is being developed in policy and legal terms and so on. So proposing that informal support deserves more attention and more recognition as an alternative and complement to formal support, not a replacement. If we widen the offer, we might be able to offer something that hits the mark for the young person with a different kind of need. So it's an alternative or a complement, not a replacement. There may be less risk of stigma with informal support. I think that's an interesting question to ask. Does informal support involve less stigma for young people? Are they less embarrassed about seeking informal support than formal support? I think we need to investigate that, but I suspect that is the case. There's also, I think, a potential about it that informal support may be available when formal support is not. In other words, at weekends, in the evening, and so on, when services may not be fully operational to respond to the needs. So it's not time limited by age limits or in other ways. However, I would want to stress it's not a magic bullet. And we have to be realistic. There are limits to what informal support can offer, just as there are to what formal support can offer. But it's really, I think, the case I'm making is that we need to think about the two together in terms of building the capacity of the community as a whole to respond to the needs of this group. There's an Australian team who I quote from at different points in the presentation, who say that informal support networks are diverse. They've done a lot of research on this. These networks are diverse, changeable, and tenuous, and that's an important word as well, that maybe they're not always constant or predictable. So we just need to bear that in mind. They're human. They reflect human strengths and frailties. Fundamentally, support requires the trust of the young person to engage with the support. You can offer all the support you like, and if the young person doesn't have trust in the offer or the person offering, they won't engage. The chances are that some young people who find it hard to trust the system may trust some of informal actors in their life. They may not. There are some young people, I think, who find it hard to trust anyone because of what has happened in their lives. But I suggest, and the research certainly, I think, strongly supports this, that trust is a fundamental issue. And it's quite linked to recognition, actually. I think that it makes trusting easier if people feel fundamentally recognized in the encounters they have. So why may young people not opt into support or engage with support? Important question. And this Australian team have come up with a number of answers to this based on a very exhaustive review of the evidence. They say that helping young people regain trust in people in general, adults in general, despite earlier experiences of trauma. So if they've had repeated intense rejection or other forms of troubling experience, they may just feel that they have wished to switch off from the world, switch off from adult life, adult society. Helping people to stay connected to family and former carers, even where there were difficulties. And just because there have been difficulties doesn't mean that these difficulties will continue indefinitely, or that they can't be resolved in some way. We come back to that. Having the skills to build relationships and romantic relationships, to build supportive relationships and romantic relationships. We know that's not the easiest thing in the world for anybody, but it is particularly challenging, I think, for young people in care who may start from way behind the starting line in that process compared to their peers. There's also the value of and the value of participation in sporting and leisure activities, and particularly where they have not done that, they may have missed out on opportunities, but that may be a way to help them catch up in some senses in this social skills area, if it's possible. Now, this quote, this is a young woman who was involved in a research study in the west of Ireland, and she said, she was asked, what would you say to young people about making connections or staying connected? She was a care leaver. And she said, make sure that you keep in contact, as the people you know longest are the people you are going to need. Make sure that you keep in contact, as the people you know longest are the people you are going to need. It's very, you know, it's a very interesting comment, and it really resonates with a lot of the research evidence. It's very insightful, I think. So what are the lessons of that statement, which, as I say, resonates with a lot of the research evidence? So I think it's an interesting quote to kind of help us think about this and stay on track about it. So I think what she's saying is that it is an important reminder that connections in adulthood to aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, carers, teachers, sports coaches, friends, very important. Very often those connections can be traced back into earlier life. The problem is that if you've been brought into the care system, you may have moved around, you may lose connections. And in fact, what I'll be suggesting is that really one of the roles of the professional services is to help to renew, re-energize those connections. It's harder in some ways, I would suggest, to establish completely new connections, to make new friendships. Although there are some exceptions. I think it's possible to do that more in the world of work and education, perhaps more so. But in general, it's probably easier to renew existing connections than build new ones. And that's an important issue for people who have weak or thin networks. So in the case where the young person has weak networks, there is an interesting field of practice where people try to dig deep into their family tree to talk to all the people who are in some way on paper connected, even if not in a personal sense, to see if any of them are willing to play a part in the life of the young person. And sometimes that seems to bear fruit. So who are the actors in informal support? And again, this is, I'm drawing on this Australian work, which is a very good summary of the issues in many ways. Family members. Now, we might think because the child came into care from a family that had problems, that there's no prospect of any of those family members having something useful to offer. But that's not actually true, because in many cases, and we'll see more evidence of that, in many cases, there are family members who have stayed in touch or are trusted or have something positive to offer. Similarly, ex-carers, people who were foster carers at some point in the young person's life, or social educators, friends, romantic partners, even the parents of romantic partners, mothers particularly, as you might guess, mentors. Very often people find a mentor in the community, somebody who's a sports coach or somebody who runs a chess club or something like that. Actors in education and employment, fellow students, teachers, actors in community organizations and religious institutions or organizations, religious leaders, community leaders, peer care leavers. Very striking how often those are a group, but maybe somewhat older people who've been through the same system and can offer, who the young person finds it easier to trust. Now, this is, just to give you a little flavor, a study done some years ago. It's in some ways quite some time ago, but I suppose it depends on your age and perspective, how long it feels, but anyway. But this is a study that there was a study of 205 foster carers, long-term foster carers in Ireland, talking about at least one of the children in their care. And they were asked, one of the questions they were asked is, for the child who was who would they rate as a significant adult in the child's life? Who was special for the child in their foster home? So it wasn't necessarily somebody in the foster home, but at the time that the young person was living in the foster home, who in the child's world was important to them, in the home or in their wider world? Interestingly, the carers, 34% of carers said the most frequently mentioned people were the carer's grown-up son or daughter. In foster care, we put a lot of emphasis on what the adults do, as in the parents, but actually I mean, not that this is not to say that parents aren't important, but we might overlook the contribution made by other people in the household who are over 18. And 1 in 3 of the foster carers said that the person they considered most significant for the foster child was one of their own adult biological children. Almost 20% said it was other relatives of the carer. Okay, the carer's parents, in other words, the foster grandparents, sister or brother, foster aunt or foster uncle of the children, niece and nephew, which would be really foster cousins of the children. These were mentioned in 20% of the interviews. These were mentioned as the most significant person. School teachers at 11.6%, foster carers themselves in 10%. I think that foster carers are a little modest in that, and it's probably a bit of a flaw in the whole procedure that they kind of double counted themselves, because there was another part of the interview where they were asked to talk about their own relationship. So, but anyway, it's just interesting that that came out. But they were probably being too modest. But anyway, they were in the list. Sports coaches 7.5%, previous carers 6%, neighbours of foster carers almost 5%. Now, when you total all of the green percentages there, it adds up to something like 68% of the carers were talking about somebody related to the foster home as being the most important figure in the child's life. So it's just an interesting, it's an interesting indicator of how important foster care can be in terms of the broader range of people that it connects the child, potentially connects the child to. And really, if you think about it, if you give people a bigger choice, there's possibly a chance that you find what you're looking for in the bigger choice. So this is a different study. I don't know if you can read those figures, but the people were asked this. These are a secondary study where these are small qualitative studies, but nevertheless, I think they do shine a light on the relevance of informal support. So the household in which the child, they were trying to get a sense of who made up the social network of the young people in care or the care leavers. Who were the people they nominated as being part of the network they would rely on, draw on, connect with in everyday life. A quarter of the network was made up of the household in which they lived, which was the foster care household, either as a child in care or as a care leaver that they were still living in that household. Other family could mean other foster family members or their own birth family. That was another quarter. So the foster care household and other family members constituted half of their network. Work or school contacts constituted about 1 in 6. Other friends, 10%. So 1 in 10 other friends outside of all these different organizations, and neighbors 5%. Interestingly, professionals 7%. So now that's not a criticism of professionals, but I think there are certain things professionals can offer, and certain things that maybe it's more difficult to offer. And I think this social network lens helps us see the different kinds of support that young people need. The message from this study really is that foster carers and friends are probably the 2 most important groups in the network. Now, I'm not saying that holds true across every study you do on foster children, but it's still an interesting message, and maybe one that professionals wouldn't automatically think of, particularly friends. So if the business is about building long-term connections for young people, and I'd suggest it is in many ways, the importance of friends. We saw that the adult children of foster carers can be an important resource. Birth or foster grandparents can be important. And bear in mind that children in foster care may have up to 8 grandparents. foster families have neighbours. And also important to say that remarkable the number of stories you read in the research of young people who, where the relationship became strained with the foster family or with the carers in late teens, and somehow reconciliation set in the middle 20s or thereabouts, often linked to the birth of a child, where the child brings everyone together and people can't quite remember what they were fighting about anyway. Maturity probably plays a part, and a little bit of forgiveness. But all of that reminds us that change is possible. So we shouldn't take the present state of play as the forever state of play. Things can change. So this, just to tell you a few stories from actual research evidence, this is a story of the role of an aunt and her daughter, who was the cousin of the young woman in care. This was a formal kinship care placement. So foster care with relatives recognized by the child welfare system and arranged by the child welfare system, funded by the child welfare system. But in the late teens, the placement broke down. The young woman went off in a huff because she felt she wasn't being understood. She ended up eventually becoming pregnant, but when her daughter was born, there was a reconciliation. And now the aunt is her child's daytime minder while she does a study course, and all-round support to the mother. But interestingly as well, she is also close friends with her cousin, who was in the same household when she was in care. They're both now young women living independently. And well, this young woman has now moved back in with the aunt, but the aunt's own daughter is now living independently. And at the point of the interview, she had just, the girl who was doing the interview, the care leaver, said that she had just babysat for the cousin, so the cousin could go out on a date. But the importance of that story is that it was an opportunity for the care leaver to not be a recipient, but a provider of support. And where support is reciprocal, this is ideal, because that cements the kind of relationships that support involves. You're more likely to feel committed to support somebody if you owe them support because they did you a favor, then you have to do them a favor, and so on. It just also makes the young care leaver feel more included, more recognized, more involved, more connected, feel more belonging, and so on. We mentioned in different ways along the way there, foster carers, neighbors. Again, might seem very, peripheral, tangential, not very, a bit random, the idea that foster carers, neighbors would be important. But there's a very interesting story. A young woman in foster care, and her school required her to get work experience. And the foster carer said, she came home and expected the foster carer, any young person might do this, ask the parents, can you help me find somebody who will give me work experience? And the foster carer said, well, you could ask my friend and my neighbor, she runs a flower shop, maybe she'll take you on. She did, and she not only did that, but gave her lifts, the young woman lifts to and from the shop when she was going to the shop, so saved her a lot of time on public transport. In other ways, she was quite supportive. The whole thing was a success, and eventually she gave the young woman part-time work. So the young woman was being taken on not because she was in care, but because she was competent, which was about acquiring an identity as a successful worker in her own right, not just a young person in care, but somebody who had a rightful place in the workforce. Gradually, the story moves on and she gets other jobs, and then she becomes pregnant, has a baby, and this brought lots of change in her life. Now this young woman is a health and social professional, having gone back to college and got very good academic results. Her journey began with that neighbor of the foster mother and her flower shop and that work experience placement. Everything flows from that. This is a story of a grandfather and a boy in residential care. The boy was living in a children's home. The family trade of his family was fine polishing of fine furniture. And the grandfather was keen to pass this skill on to his grandson, maybe not to train him up completely, but to give him some sense and some connection to the tradition. So he asked the head of the unit, would he allow the grandfather and the son who was in care in the unit to use a shed on the campus of the children's home as a space where they could do the work and store the furniture. And the guy in charge said, yes, you can. Very good decision. So that was about building and strengthening the boy's connection to his family for the future, supporting and recognizing the boy's identity as a family member, as a grandson, as an apprentice, as capable, and was offering the boy recognition through shared time together. The one thing we all know from children is the most valuable thing you can give children is your time and attention. That's what they most want. And this boy was getting that in spades from the grandfather. They were spending time together. And the boy was also learning how to be a good man from that experience, which is also an important contribution to the boy's development. So this is a boy talking about growing up with his foster siblings, in other words, the birth children of the foster family. And he says, I suppose my foster sister, like being in work and stuff like that, she was a bit of a role model. So she was older and she was in work. She was kind of the pathfinder or the person who was showing the way in the household. And the fact that all my older foster siblings had work, this was the norm. There was just no way out. This was how you did life and how you did adult life. It was all very positive. He saw that as really shaping and transformative for him. This was just how it was. And here, as I say, the foster sibling means the birth child of the foster carer. So it helped this boy develop his identity as a worker, not just as a young person in care. It offered peer support through his relationship with the foster siblings. He was getting a subtle induction into the world of work and its norms and expectations, and possibly coming from a background where he wouldn't have got that in his own family. In the recent COVID crisis, we did some interviews with young people who were care leavers about their lives during the COVID times. And this is a story of a young woman. She had a mental health crisis during COVID. A lot of people were affected in mental health terms. But two friends of hers in her college, one a woman in her 40s, the other her own age, but the three of them were very good friends on the course. The two friends spotted that she was really becoming quite unwell in mental health terms, that she was having some kind of a crisis. And they arranged for her to get the help that she needed. That they connected her up with a mental health team who provided very good support. But that support would not have been delivered in such a timely fashion, or possibly in such an effective fashion, if the two friends were not the people who had, if you like, bridged her into the mental health support when she needed it, particularly in COVID times when everything was so disrupted. Again, that kind of intense connection between friends and getting through some drama like that will, I would think, cement a relationship over time between those people. And it really does, I think, underline the importance of friendship and friends as a positive experience for people in the care system and care leavers. And not just friends in the care system, but friends outside the care system. Both, I think, show value in the research. So these, I suggest, are, if you like, sites or sources of support or arenas of support. The school setting, and that of course includes college. I'm using school just as a shorthand. The workplace, both work colleagues, bosses, managers, all of these people, evidence that they can play an important role. Friends, I've emphasized, birth family, but also ex-carers. So it's not just the birth family, but also the foster carers or social educators. Excuse me. Yeah, thanks. Brilliant, thank you. And also the value of recreation and hobbies and interests to help people to make their way in the world and possibly also find employment of some kind. So these are, I'd suggest, arenas of possibility which can help to develop positive identity. People are, I'm a competent worker and so on, I'm a good friend, social connections with friends, positive development over time. The successful resolution of that mental health crisis has maybe provided that young woman with a model for seeking help in the future, and the message she has received is that if you seek help, you will benefit. Very valuable life message, life learning for her. The experience of social inclusion through part-time work and other activities. Also really that we're, through these stories, I think, seeing how we might be seeing the development of narratives of potential, that things can get better, rather than narratives of failure, which sometimes hangs over discourses about young people in the care system, that really they aren't going to go far, they're not going to do well, so why should we expect too much? And let's not make too many demands and so on. So I think that an important message here is that this kind of informal support can make a difference. So I have the temerity to suggest possibly a new vision for the role of formal services. I'm not saying we don't need formal services, absolutely, I want to really make that clear. But that maybe one of the things that we're trying to do in formal services is help young people build networks for life. Who are the people that they can call on? If we work within a life course perspective, we're needing to think about more than just what we're solving the problem now, but also how do we strengthen the young person for the future? Is what we're doing now going to increase or decrease their capacity across the life course? So addressing the future as well as the present in the way we think about things. And really seeing the importance of continuity and connection in the lives of children. So trying to preserve anything that's working in their relationship networks. So okay, they're in care because of birth family problems, but which members of the birth family are actually people, are there people in the birth family they trust, like, and who like them, and could they help? Are there ex-carers who maybe fell out at one point, but are willing to still be supportive in a certain way? So finding where there is trust and building on that. Who does the young person trust? Start that with that question, and that may open up a lot of windows and opportunities. Think of those arenas of possibility, the colored boxes I showed, as potential sources of support. Trusting the potential of ordinary people, that you don't have to have many qualifications to offer human support very often. So, you know, that I'm not saying it doesn't hurt, or I'm not saying it hurts to have the qualifications, but sometimes actually it's the time and interest of the person that's most healing. So valuing what people outside formal services may have to offer, and also remembering that ex-carers may be important, because I don't know if it's the case in Spain, but certainly in some countries, the norm is to say, well, actually, you know, you don't have any place in the life of the child now that you're not the carer. And that may not be the right stance to take. Maybe we may need a more nuanced approach to that. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your attention.
Bé, molt bé. Moltes gràcies, Robbie. Thank you. Ara seria el moment de les preguntes.
I have to get my machine. I need support. Formal support.
Don't worry. Yes?
Yep.
You can round it and put your ear inside.
Yes.
Yes? And then have it. Now.
Thank you very much.
Yes?
You've just had a good illustration of the limits of my technical or technological skill.
Bueno, les preguntes, va, qui vol començar? Qui s'atreveix a començar les preguntes? Vinga, va, Joan, vinga.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. Sí, ara faré en català, però...
Ens està demostrant que saps anglès. Ets molt dolent.
Carme said that I speak in Catalan, then I'm going to speak in Catalan. La meva pregunta ha sigut molt interessant. Jo tinc una mica d'obsessió i molt relacionat amb el que ha explicat vostè sobre les xarxes informals, que és que crec que el sistema de protecció, almenys a Espanya i a Catalunya, té molt mala premsa. És a dir, té molt mala imatge a nivell social. Llavors, si fóssim capaços potser de canviar aquesta imatge, potser aquestes xarxes informals podrien ser molt més productives per a aquests nois i noies. Però la meva pregunta seria si a Irlanda també hi ha aquesta imatge més gris, més fosca del que és el sistema de protecció a la infància i si teniu algunes maneres de veure com podríem canviar aquesta imatge a nivell social, perquè els exemples que ens has posat, per exemple, de la floristeria o, per exemple, aquesta noia del Covid que tenia aquests amics que tenien aquesta xarxa, doncs si hi ha aquests prejudicis que aquests nois i aquestes noies han fet no sé quantes coses quan realment són unes víctimes d'una situació que ells no han triat, fa que sigui molt més difícil que puguin establir aquestes xarxes. Res, només era una mica entre reflexió i pregunta, però bàsicament si tens alguna idea de com podríem fer per canviar aquesta imatge social sobre aquests nois i aquestes noies que estan en el sistema.
Yes. Well, when I say yes, I don't necessarily have 100% answers, but I would say, first of all, that the issues in Ireland are, I think we are in the same place in terms of the public attitudes. However, sorry, I'm getting feedback. I think the main message I've kind of heard from a lot of different sources is the importance of getting good news out. That what the public tends to get a lot of the time is bad news, or unedited bad news, or unverified bad news. So there's very much, it's a bit like what we see in politics generally. This rumor takes over from truth. So I think, we need to recognize that communications is a very important part of the work that government does and that public services do and that child protection does. And so I think we need to have more stories being told by people who've been helped. And we need to have some of those stories about the flower story and other stories out there being told by the people who have benefited themselves. And I think that well-crafted accounts using all of the best media techniques will have an impact. But I think all systems in every country are behind the curve on that, if I can use that American phrase. So that would be one suggestion, I think. But I think also that the system itself needs to recognize that this is part of what helps, so that these resources are out there, and there's a lot of goodwill among other. I think we need to see the system more broadly than just being the people on the payroll, and to see that there's in some ways an ecology of support, part of which is under the umbrella of the people on the child protection payroll, but there are other people who are willing to play a part because they have a connection to this kid. It may be, if we try to recruit people to work with any child in the system, and we put an ad in the paper or on television or whatever and say, come and be a volunteer in our system, you might get some response, but you're going to get a more committed response from people who know this kid. And that's why kinship care works, because some foster care, in general, we're finding it harder now to recruit foster carers in all systems. But the one sort of segment of foster care that seems to be able to sort of provide a timely response is kinship care, because people are committed to a specific child. And I think that in that insight, it helps us see how we might also tap into the community, working with specific children and finding the help, the resources in that child's system, the people who'd be willing to step in to help that child, and working with them as partners, not finding reasons not to do it. Because, I could tell you stories I've heard of why people who were being constructive, positive actors were told, no, can't do that. That's against the rules, or whatever the rule was, it wasn't allowed. Now, sometimes maybe that was reasonable, but sometimes it seemed to me it wasn't. Because the people making the decision had lost sight of this bigger picture about, are we helping the young person have more resources when they're older? Or are we reducing the resources or the confidence or the skills or whatever? Are we adding or subtracting in what we do? And if we're not adding, we need to think about why. Sorry, I've rambled a bit in that answer, but I hope it helps a little bit. Thank you.
Aquí.
Hola, buenas tardes, moltes gràcies, molt interessant. Retomant una mica el que ara explicàveu, crec que també com a sistema formal tenim uns sistemes molt garantistes de la privacitat, de la protecció de dades, de la protecció del menor, i per tant són sistemes molt tancats. I això ens impedeix dues coses. A vegades explicar-nos les coses bones, no? I l'altra, que hi ha un gran desconeixement. Quan hi ha aquest estigma, moltes vegades és perquè no es coneix, però el sistema per protegir ens tanquem. Llavors, el poder obrir les finestres, el poder obrir que altres persones participin, voluntàries... Clar, jo em pregunto, com a nivell legal, què hem de fer o quins esquemes hem de trencar perquè això sigui possible, perquè ara m'imagino més les coses que posaríem a la llista del que no es pot fer de les que es poden fer. Com trenquem totes aquestes muralles? Thank you.
No, you're right. We are kind of caught up in a web of legal constraint. But on data protection, for example, which is kind of the dark cloud of and it's, like a lot of things, there's a lot of good reasons for data protection. But one of the things that I've learned, and I'm not a lawyer, but the data, the person about the person owns their own data. Fundamental rule. The person owns their own data. We have to respect their confidentiality and anonymity, but they own the anonymity and they can change that. Now, in the case of a young person in care, you might be able to change it under 18, but when they're over 18, and of course they have to be willing to do this, but many young people might find this quite, now, there's a lot of ethical issues about rushing out to the microphones. The phalanx of microphones outside the child welfare office in downtown Barcelona. That's not what I mean, but but at the same time, I think many young people who've grown up in care and parents would be willing to take part in well-crafted television programs. And I think television companies would bite your hand off to do those programs. But they have to be a lot of intellectual and financial resources have to be put into that. But I think that could be a game changer if it's done well. And I think it's not just a case of doing it once. Sustaining change means, you know, Coca-Cola don't say, we ran an advertising campaign in 1947 and it was very successful. So we've done advertising. We don't need to advertise again. Everyone knows about us. They're out there every day. I hope that's okay. Is that, did I respond to your question?
Robbie, moltes gràcies. M'ha agradat molt la conferència. Se'm fa estrany parlar-te en català, però bueno. Segurament ho diré millor en català també. Trobo que m'ha agradat molt també la visió de tenir una visió al llarg de la vida, perquè d'actuar pensant al llarg de la vida. Jo moltes vegades als meus alumnes d'educació social els dic, si apliques la lògica de pensar què faria un pare, segurament faries molt. I el tema de les relacions és cert, perquè jo veig que els pares dels nens petits, el primer que els preocupa és quedar amb altres pares perquè els seus fills tinguin amics. Buscar que tota la resta de la família s'impliqui. I el que ens passa una mica a nosaltres és que jo crec que en l'àmbit d'acolliment familiar això més o menys passa així. De fet, tenim dades en què ens diuen que els joves que han estat acollits en família tenen bona xarxa social amb els iguals i que estan bé, però el problema el tenim amb l'acolliment residencial. Més que res perquè hi ha aquesta barrera, però ja comença a vegades amb el centre, perquè me'n recordo per aquí amb una companya que va haver-hi un temps que preguntàvem en els centres què feien, per exemple, si obrien les portes als amics dels nens perquè vinguessin a fer deures i molts ens deien que no, que què farien aquí amb tants nens que els embolicarien, però hi havia centres que sí ho feien. Hi havia centres que agafaven els nens i se n'anaven tots a jugar a futbol, a veure com jugava una futbol sala. Aleshores és com trobar la manera per convèncer una mica de portar també els centres residencials, no sé si en aquest sentit vosaltres teniu alguna estratègia.
I agree. In fact, I've just written a chapter on that topic recently about how can residential care work in this space about opening up long-term change in the young person's life. And it seems to me the key issue is to open up to the world. In other words, that encourage young people to have connections out in the world through sport, friendship, different ways, but music, whatever it is. In fact, and work experience actually from school is an important example. There are naturally occurring ways, that you can do that, but you need to think that that is the way we have a wider purpose rather than just that the child has to be driven to here and back again. There is actually something more profound going on. I think staff in care settings need to be helped, supported to see that and to value that. And maybe again, the good stories have to be promoted as examples to everyone else. So find good stories and make sure everyone knows about them. I think by good stories I mean good examples of good practice.
Hola, moltes gràcies, Robbie. I molt contenta que poguessis presentar, no, un sistema de protecció que anés més enllà del suport, no, formal i pogués incloure el suport informal. Per tant, això ens fa un canvi de paradigma, no, perquè inclous el suport informal com allò que marca, no, deies, la diferència amb el desenvolupament i amb la cura d'aquests infants. I llavors, si realment, no? Perquè jo penso que compartim i la recerca ens diu això també que ens has demostrat, que és tan important el suport informal i una estratègia seria aquesta d'oferir i obrir la possibilitat que tinguin aquestes relacions. L'altra pregunta seria, i voldria saber aquí la teva opinió, si aquest suport informal l'hem de deixar que vagi creixent al llarg de la vida, l'hem d'incentivar o l'hem d'integrar també en aquest sistema formal, formant part dels equips o no. Gràcies.
Okay, thank you, Nuria. I think that is a challenging question. My starting point would be that the key to this is to see this as something that's child-led rather than system-led. I think there is a system leadership element to it in that don't mess it up. So, I mean, obviously don't, collude with the local child abuser or something like that, by just turning a blind eye to the fact that they're running riot in the system. But I mean, so obviously there has to be some level of verification, but I don't want that to become some sort of very heavy-handed process that delays everything happening, and the child has lost interest by the time somebody comes back 6 months later and says, I don't mean to be, this would be the Irish case, that would take them a long time to make up their mind, and in the meantime the child has moved on to something, and just the moment is lost. Do you know what I mean? In some sense. So I think it is an organic. I think it works best when it's organic, when it's growing out of the natural inclinations or priorities of the child or their the people they trust. Trust is so important. So you can't really bring an organized response because the trust isn't there. Without the trust, it won't work. But I do think there are processes and protocols and procedures that could smooth the process if everyone was on the same page. So it's important. I think it's important to try and get on the same page, but that doesn't mean colonizing the informal care or informal support. So, that there's a sort of a systems handbook, procedural handbook for managing informal support. I think that misses the point in a way. But I would be very happy to sit down with people and really wrestle with some of the issues that are posed by what I'm saying, because I know it's not as simple as that in some ways. I think it's pretty well as simple as that, but I think if we can hold on to the idea that this is about child-led organic development rather than trying to engineer a standardized response to every child and saying we want to add 3 or 4 people to every child's network in our system, which would be a worthy goal, but I don't know that engineering in a top-down way would achieve it. That's the point. And if our systems can be more, can operate in more subtle ways, I think they will achieve the purpose they have. And I think it's learning from success. So that's one of my kind of, I found that helpful in my own personal life, but also in my professional and academic life. learn from success. What is working in any situation? Go into any situation in any context and start with what is working, and then try and build out from that and see, in terms of learning, what might be useful to do. What is working? How can we build on that and see where that takes us? So I know it's a bit simplistic, but and it kind of makes sense to people. It's an optimistic question. It cuts through all the
Bona tarda. Moltes gràcies per la conferència, és molt interessant. Jo sí volia fer una petita reflexió en forma també de pregunta i després una petita qüestió més personal. El meu punt una mica més enfatitzat és sobre el col·lectiu de joves migrats sols, que aquí per les circumstàncies que tenim de territori som frontera i és una de les problemàtiques que hem d'abordar. Clar, potser el discurs social que està creixent o que s'està veient a part d'Europa, que és reaccionari, és en contra, o hi ha una part que està allà, potser crea una concepció social que va en contra, i a partir d'aquí potser la xarxa aquesta de suport més informal no es dona tant perquè potser crea unes barreres o potser crea una posició en contra de tenir aquest tipus de relació. Pregunto, és una mena de reflexió. Llavors, després la pregunta que volia formular és una mica més personal, d'opinió, que és arrel del projecte aquest de llei que hi ha del primer ministre, el Rishi Sunak, que hi ha la idea de portar a persones migrades o no sé com dir-ho cap a Ruanda. Primer, com es veu des del suport formal i després si des del suport més informal estan sortint més iniciatives o la gent està reaccionant. Gràcies.
Well, I'm glad to say I'm a citizen of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, so we're a separate state. I'm not responsible for the mad things the British government does.
Yes, sorry.
But I know that you're asking a serious question. So, and in many ways, I recognize the issues because we have some version of that same issue in Ireland and the social reaction. I don't want to sound glib. I think it is very challenging, and I think it requires a lot of us to sit down and think hard about what is the right way to provide, how to provide systems of support that make sense in the reality. What's working? So in the previous research on this group, before this sort of intensification of a crisis, if I might put it like that, two things. There are some threads of insight which might be helpful. One is, so where can young people in this situation find support? And I totally take your point about the changing or the poisoning of the atmosphere in some ways. But one of the sources of informal support for young people leaving care systems, migrant or not, is other young people who are in a similar situation, who are older and have been in a similar situation. So peers might be one. There might be some way of thinking about peer groups. Now I know that's only a starting point. It's much more complicated than that, I know, but that's, I think, one of the, is there some potential in that idea? Also, what again, trust, what works and where is the trust in the system? It seems to me that some of those, at least some of the young people involved, trust faith communities in some way. So is it possible to work with faith communities as one of the resources in the informal networks? And I would say some of the research evidence, in fact, a PhD student of mine many moons ago, one of my first PhD students said, we found that, and it has stood the test of time as an insight, the importance of religious faith as a resource in their lives. So I think those are two threads I think that are worth considering. Education is third. I think a lot of young people who are migrants have a kind of maybe not quite a blind faith in education, but they have maybe an exaggerated faith in what the changes it can bring about. But at the same time, that is perhaps something, a project they trust. So that's a third line to think about. And I'm not wanting to sound glib because it's a very complex issue, I understand that, but in this context, in a short few minutes, that's maybe those are some things to offer. But thank you for the question.
Gràcies.
¿Alguna pregunta més? Bueno, jo tinc una pregunta. Bueno, moltes preguntes. A veure, però començaré. El tema de la xarxa informal, has parlat de les relacions entre iguals, has parlat també de reforçar les connexions que ja existien previ a fer-ne de noves, no? Llavors, a mi el que se m'ocorreix, m'estic sentint jo, el que se m'ocorreix és que potser els professionals pequem en excés de protecció, no? I llavors volem protegir tant els infants i adolescents del resto de la comunitat, de que no l'estigmatitzen, de que no li facin mal, de que no li pugui passar res perquè jo en soc responsable, que no deixem que entren a l'ecosistema natural d'una forma natural. Podria ser que llavors, perquè per les estadístiques dels estudis, la major part veuen com un suport informal important els familiars de la família d'acollida, els tutors de l'escola. Podria ser que el fet que aquestes persones no tinguin cap obligació fa que els xiquets i les xiquetes se sentin més sentits, més visibles, perquè al final no és una obligació per a ells. Si se preocupen per mi és perquè jo importo per a alguna cosa. Aquesta seria una mica la... Llavors això el que ens portaria és a que hauríem de promoure més l'acolliment familiar, els centres petits, integrats en la comunitat, no? Sí. Jo m'he quedat una mica en el tema i el de la Coca-Cola. Com els convertim en Coca-Cola? O sigui, clar, com podem fer una campanya de bones notícies? No? Com ho hauríem de fer? O sigui, acompanyant-los dins la comunitat seria una manera, no cal fer una gran campanya a la tele, no? Pot ser que acompanyant-los dins la pròpia comunitat poguéssim fer aquesta campanya i que es convertissin en Coca-Cola?
You mean if somebody would sponsor this yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point you make about the neighbors and relatives of the foster carers, because they are pure volunteers. They're not being paid an allowance by the system. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with paying carers allowance, they should be paid. But for some children, there's a sensitivity that you're only doing this work because you're paid. do you really, would you care about me if you weren't being paid? And the foster granny or the flower shop owner or the cousin whose child is being minded by the young woman who is a care leaver, they all feel recognized, and the children in those stories, the young people in those stories, feel valued and recognized by the foster granny or the aunt or the neighbor. But it's the foster care process that opens up those opportunities. But I would have thought in a city the size of Dublin, and certainly the city the size of Barcelona, that you could find some exemplars in your foster carers who would be good performers for television. Now, it needs a lot of work to really, but I mean, I think television is getting better at doing this in a in an ethical way, but also in a way that draws the audience. So I think communications, I think child protection needs to raise its game, and not this child protection system, but globally, we need to raise our game in communications to explain what's going on and what the good things that are going on, and that we need the voice of the service users, the children as adults, the birth parents, the grannies, the foster parents connections. And I think with good television production teams and working in cooperation with media savvy child protection people, I think a lot could be achieved. And I think it could also have an impact on foster care recruitment, as in...
Bueno, tenim alguna pregunta més? No? Molt bé. Doncs res, gràcies per haver vingut. Gràcies, Robbie. Thank you, Robbie. I res, moltes gràcies per vindre. Qualsevol cosa, doncs, bueno, continuem estant aquí i ens veiem aviat pronte en una altra conferència. Vinga, fins la pròxima.